Gillette is an American company which manufactures deodorants as well as other products. Its sales and marketing machines stretch across the globe, and it sells products throughout a global network of market retailers. This exercise will focus on how Gillette promotes its roll-on deodorant both in the United States and in Israel during the same period of 2018 and 2019. A critical analysis will take place to show how cultural differences impact marketing customization, framed around Greet Hofstede's cultural dimensions. Gillette's advert in the United States promotes Gillette's premium roll-on deodorant using two-time Super Bowl champion Chris Long. It shows that Chris sweats on the field, training and playing in the NFL tournaments, and off the field, working for his charitable children's foundation. However, he keeps his calm and he never shows sweating, thanks to Gillette's roll-on deodorant he uses. This is a very powerful statement showing that Gillette's deodorant will keep you calm and let you carry on doing what's important without you breaking a sweat. Thus, a powerful image is depicted using the statement, "Tough protection against sweat and odor." This is an effective advert, encouraging customers to buy a quality brand that does the job with guarantee, giving you 48-hour protection against sweat and odor. In contrast, Gillette's advert in Israel takes a different approach. Gillette promotes the same 48-hour deodorant, focusing on a tagline, "I don't roll on Sabbath." Clearly, the company has made adjustments to market the same product in two different countries that are similar in many ways with significant cultural differences. In Israel, crucially, the product has been marketed to a specific sector, the religious Orthodox Jewish community. This required Gillette to consider religious and thereby cultural sensitivities concerning the Jewish community, which does not shave or have easy access to mainstream media due to their religious beliefs. This is unlike the first advert, where Gillette targeted American and in general Western men who did not have such religious restrictions. The Orthodox Jews are prohibited from doing any work, which includes putting on deodorant during the 24-hour Sabbath. Gillette came up with a cunning plan. They used the Hebrew Bible, where God warns worshippers not to pray in a place of foul odor. Working with the community in Israel, Gillette ran an interactive campaign during weeks leading up to the Sabbath. They ran a series of marketing campaigns to engage the Orthodox community. They used the only media channels available, synagogue notice boards, and placed posters. They also sponsored the candle lighting service in every Orthodox newspaper. They also used the last commercial spot on the radio before the Sabbath began. In its final stage, they were driving around the streets of Israel in branded Gillette vans, playing the siren to mark the start of the Sabbath. Now let's explore the two adverts and analyze them through Hofstede's 6 cultural dimensions. Referring firstly to power distance. Israel is the only country where immigrant groups are so large they influence and change the existing values and cultures. This is reflected in the fact that modern Israel is different from the traditional religious Jewish community, who were the target of the advert in Israel. Gillette understood the cultural uniqueness of the religious Jews compared with the rest of Israel. However, the power distance score of 13 reflects modern Israel and not the religious Jewish community. So Hofstede's low score does not relate to the religious community. Otherwise, you would have expected a high score, suggesting a large gap between its worshippers and religious leaders. As for the US, a score of 40 indicates a greater gap between its establishments and individuals compared with Israel. This contrasts with what the adverts reveal. Therefore, it appears that Gillette got its marketing right without applying Hofstede's power distance scores. Looking at Hofstede's cultural dimension of individualism, the US has a score of 91, almost twice that of the score of Israel. This cultural dimension aligns with the two adverts. The US advert shows the individual superstar and focuses on his success, whereas the advert in Israel shows that every worshipper is focused on the collective nature of the Sabbath event. Referring to the third dimension, the masculinity index, the scores are high for both countries, but the US scored higher with 62. This suggests that the US is more driven by competition, hence the star's 2-time NFL winning record is emphasized in the US advert. With a score of 47 for Israel, it suggests that Israel is less masculine, which in the first instance would suggest that it does not apply to the target audience of male worshippers. However, in an unusual way, although all the worshippers are male, they don't actually stand out in dominance, as they are all engaged in the same act of worship and see God to stand out in front of them rather than themselves. So in actual fact, this cultural dimension aligns with the two ads, perhaps in an unintuitive manner. In the fourth dimension of uncertainty avoidance, Israel has a score of 81. This indicates that Israel is more concerned about controlling future unknowns and has systems and institutions to avoid future uncertainties compared with the US. This aligns with the two adverts. The worshippers strongly believe that they must observe the Sabbath and the system of God will cater for them, as destiny is in the hands of God. This is looking at it from a religious perspective, which is exactly what Gillette did to make their marketing campaign so successful. As for the US advert, it shows children can learn and build a future of possibilities, which necessarily involves unknowns. So Hofstede's dimension accurately reflects the two groups' cultural differences, and this aligns with Gillette's cultural marketing approaches in the two countries. Both countries have relatively low scores for the dimension of long-term orientation, which suggests that they both tend to show respect for traditions. This is certainly true for the religious Jews of Israel and is depicted very strongly in the advert. The whole advert in Israel was sold on the idea of obeying God and not worshipping in a place of foul odor. And of course, Gillette came and saved the day. The 48-hour deodorant allowed the Jewish worshippers to apply the deodorant before the Sabbath began. This allowed them to benefit from the fresh lasting effect during the Sabbath without the need to apply the deodorant, thereby minimizing the foul odor from worshippers and at the same time obeying God's command not to work. And to some extent, respect for traditions is also true in many regions of the US due to the Christian background of many of its communities. However, this factor is not relevant for marketing the deodorant in the US, so the advert does not need to use it. Again, Gillette seems to have got their marketing right. In the final cultural dimension, the US has a high indulgence score of 68. This is evident in the advert, which shows that if you desire anything, you can seek it. It's your right. This is very dominant in the US advert from the perspective of the star being a success, because he can be. Also, he encourages the youngsters in his foundation to become successful. In other words, it shows you can indulge in your success. Interestingly, Israel, on the other hand, does not have a score. However, analyzing the advert carefully, one would suggest a low score, as the worshippers are restraining their own desire by not working on the Sabbath. Instead, they've submitted to the holy command and given themselves to God and seeking His pleasure instead of their own by gathering in the synagogue for the holy Sabbath. In conclusion, Gillette used the words of God, "Thou shalt not work on the day of Sabbath and not worship in a place of foul smell," to very cleverly increase their deodorant sales from 2% to 12% in Israel, and used the US values to promote the same roll-on deodorant to the predominantly Western world. The two approaches were very different, yet relevant and impactful. Hofstede's framework has deficiencies as described and demonstrated, and it states on its website that scores might not reflect the values of the whole population of Israel, and this appears to be the case from these two adverts. However, Hofstede's framework is still useful for effective marketing, taking into account cultural differences as shown in the discussions. Gillette understood the cultural differences between the two nations and effectively sold a product to the two target markets.